The Last of Us is one of my favorite video games of all time. I remember playing through it the first time and just being wowed by the story and at the time the graphics and just how incredible the game really was, that it quickly became one of my favorite video games of all time. And I remember shortly after beating it, I wanted more. That I was like, is there more this game can offer me other than the DLC? But I was like, I just want to be immersed in this world. And so it was to my surprise to see this little button on the screen that said factions. And I thought, oh, I'll check it out. I don't know what that is. And I was shocked to see that there was multiplayer in this game, because usually for a game like this, that's like a story-driven game, that's an action-adventure, that you usually at the time did not have multiplayer for those kinds of things. And so I was really shocked, and I thought I would give it a go, and I got my butt handed to me. That I remember playing that for the first time, and I was terrible, because I was playing it like Call of Duty, and that was one of the cool things about Factions, is it forced you to actually have to work as a team, that you couldn't just run and gun, that you actually had to be strategic. And for that, I actually began to fall in love with it. And as I began to increase my skill at Factions, it became one of my favorite things about the original Last of Us game. And so when they announced part 2, I was super pumped, because I just assumed, oh yeah, we'll be getting a second Factions game, and I can't wait to see how they include it. And when The Last of Us Part 2 arrived, I remember just like my heart sinking and seeing that Factions wasn't there. And Naughty Dog kind of addressed this, and they said, hey, we were going to make Factions 2, and the team was developing it, and then as we were releasing it, we just realized, hey, that this game mode and how ambitious it is, it should be saved for its own game. And so we're actually going to take Factions 2 and we're going to turn it into like a bigger experience. And so that sounded sweet, but I don't know if you've noticed, but The Last of Us Part 2 came out forever ago. And there was an announcement a year ago or 2 years ago, I can't remember how long it's been, where they kind of winked and were like, hey, Factions is still being worked on. Don't worry. Here's like some images of just random art that isn't even gameplay art. And don't worry, it's going to be showing up. We'll let you know next year. And I don't know if you've noticed, but this year's almost over, and we've heard absolutely nothing about Factions. And in fact, we're getting reports that this thing is in massive trouble, and that Sony is actually trying to kill it. They're trying to sneakily take it to the farm, if you will, where they're like, don't worry, kids, we're just going to send the dog to the farm. That's what's happening with Factions. And so I want to dive into why this is happening and where this thing currently is. So let's dive into it. So first off, again, the team had an ambitious idea. I don't know what it is, but they essentially were working on Factions. It was going to be just a carbon copy sequel to what we originally had. And as they were working on it, they began to have some innovative ideas, and they got really pumped about it. And one of the main things it seems like they got pumped about was having this multiplayer and this, like, the normal thing that you would expect, but then somehow involving a story into that. And Neil was like, hey, this idea is really great. Let's run with this. Let's give this its own thing. Let's throw more money at it. Let's flesh it out, because this idea is really unique, and they must have had something that was really interesting. And so Neil loved it. And so they just decided to make it its own thing, that it was some kind of an ambitious idea that had never really been done before. Naughty Dog was going to do it. And if anybody could do a story-based multiplayer game like that well, it is Naughty Dog. That they are like the kings of storytelling in the gaming industry. And so it seemed like it was a really great thing, and that's what they presented last year. Was they presented exactly that, that essentially what we were told is what they showed us, and they were like, hey, don't worry, we're working on it. We've been working on it ever since. We've been working on The Last of Us, and it's going to be coming out sometime soon, and we'll be able to show you some more stuff later. And it's going to be a multiplayer experience that's like the Factions you know, but with that interactive story. But of course, it's been a while, and it still is nowhere to be seen. And so this is kind of where I think the problems actually begin for the Factions Part 2 thing that they were supposed to release, is that this thing is taking an insane amount of time to develop. And that usually is fine, except that time in the gaming industry is money, that they are constantly paying animators and people to sit in rooms to talk about how to make this thing work, and they've been paying people to do it for years. And so they've been paying all of this money and throwing all of this cash into this thing, but they still have nothing to show for it yet as far as actually making that money back. And Naughty Dog is like the golden child at PlayStation, where they're allowed to do a lot of stuff. But at some point, Factions 2 actually needs to become profitable. And the more time you spend in development on this, the harder it's going to be to actually make that profit. And so I think that's where you kind of fit the next stage of the even bigger problems, where you have all this time being put into this game, which initially seems awesome, but is a ton of money. And so Sony's looking at this being like, wow, we are spending an insane amount of money on this multiplayer. We need to make our money back. How do we make our money back? And this is where the bigger problem comes in that's actually killing this thing. Is the reports are that Sony doesn't have like this big multiplayer game like other platforms do, and they really kind of want to get into the ring with it. And so when Naughty Dog had this idea for Factions 2, Sony got really pumped because they wanted it to be their multiplayer game. That when you bought a PlayStation and thought multiplayer and thought online gaming, you thought Factions 2, and they essentially wanted it to be their own PUBG or Fortnite or Modern Warfare exclusively on PlayStation, and that's what Sony wanted Naughty Dog to do. And initially this seems fine. It seems like the two can kind of live together, but they did have two differing ideas of what this thing was, where Naughty Dog wanted to create a cool multiplayer experience that had story elements, and Sony wanted to turn it into their own Fortnite. And the thing is that initially you're like, okay, well, maybe we can work together and get this to work. But Naughty Dog are perfectionists. They spend an insane amount of time on their games. And in doing so, they produce some really great stuff. But also in doing so, they spend an insane amount of money, because time, again, is money when it comes to video games. And that's where the big problem comes in, is Sony is really apparently pushing for microtransactions. And Naughty Dog does not agree with it one bit. And so they've kind of hit this fork in the road of development, where it's been going on for so long that Sony's essentially, from my understanding, saying, hey, this game needs to be profitable. We want it to make a ton of money. We don't want it to just make a little bit of money. We want to make insane bucket loads of money like Fortnite, Modern Warfare, and PUBG do. And so we need you guys to implement those kind of things into this game. And so they really want to lay into the microtransaction part of it, because it's a money-making machine. But Naughty Dog is, for better or for worse, a company that actually genuinely cares about their art, and when they have a vision, they want to pursue it. And so when they aren't feeling like this is what they want, they're not gonna do it. And so they're kind of at a standstill, because Naughty Dog doesn't want this to just be a cash cow kind of game where it's full of microtransactions and squeezing every dime out of the players. But Sony kind of wants it to be that. One, because it'll make them a lot of money, but two, because they've been putting so much time and money into this thing and allowing Naughty Dog to develop this for so long that they're like, hey, Naughty Dog, at some point we need to make our money back, which is kind of fair, but again, absolutely sucks for fans of this game and for the artists. And the longer it takes, again, the more and more money Sony wants this thing to make, because they need to make that money back. And so now apparently they've come at that fork in the road, and Naughty Dog really does not agree with the direction that Sony wants them to take this thing in, that it's so outside of where they were heading with it and the vision they initially had for this thing, that Sony just wants to scrap it. Naughty Dog just wants to scrap it. They're like, if that's the game you want to make, that we're not making it. And Sony goes, well, fine, then we'll cut the funding. And Naughty Dog goes, fine, we just won't make it then, because that's not the vision we had. And so they're really kind of at a standstill by the sounds of things because of this. And I think that Naughty Dog's dream is just genuinely too expensive. And, you know, there's people sitting in a room who are looking at how to make PlayStation more profitable. They want it to be up and to the right. And for better or for worse, when it comes to the dreams, if you can't pay for your dreams, the people writing the checks don't really care. And because they're so reluctant to include microtransactions and have it kind of be this cash cow kind of a game, Sony no longer thinks that it can actually make its money back. And so they want to kill it. And so it sounds like that's what's happened with this game, is that they had a crazy ambitious idea and they went for it. And because Naughty Dog, for better or for worse, are perfectionists, it is taking an insanely long amount of time to develop. And time, again, is money. And so they've put all this time and money into this thing, and they have this dream for it to be this crazy multiplayer experience that also is really heavily story-driven. And Sony is essentially going like, yeah, but how can we make it more like Fortnite? And Naughty Dog's like, we don't want to make it like Fortnite. And Sony's like, yeah, but think about the money. We want it to be like Fortnite, and we're the ones writing the checks. And so because of that, it's coming to standstill, and it seems like it's dead. And so that's why Factions 2 is probably being taken to the farm, being taken out back, and silently kind of just put away and never talked about again, is because it's the war between money and art, where you've got people in suits who want to make a profit and want to increase their stock value and be up and to the right, and then you've got artists who just want to make cool art, and they don't care how much it costs or how much time it takes, that they want to make the vision that they've had. And those two things are really clashing in a way that I don't think Naughty Dog and Sony has ever clashed that we know of in their history. And so what PlayStation is saying is, hey, you don't want to include these microtransactions, you don't want to make the game that we are wanting you to make, that's fine. No more funding for you. We'll just kill this thing, and they won't budge, which you got to give them some props that they're willing to stick to their vision. But it looks like that dream I had of having that Factions 2 in the way, with the kind of combat that The Last of Us Part 2 had, and the updated graphics and maps, and having that gameplay come back into my life in a new way, it seems like it's dead, and that it's probably not happening, which makes me incredibly sad as a fan of the Factions multiplayer. I really can't state enough how much I loved the multiplayer in that Last of Us game. But it looks like the sequel and the ambitious thing that Naughty Dog was trying to create isn't going to exist. At least that's what it looks like for now. And so with that being said, I want to know what you guys think. Who do you blame? Do you blame Sony? Do you blame Naughty Dog? Do you think that they should just cave and include more microtransactions and just make the game and stop being such sticks in the mud? Or do you think that Sony is getting money hungry and that this is a ridiculous thing to put on them? Did you enjoy the first Factions? Were you looking forward to Factions 2? Do you think there's a chance that this thing could still happen and that possibly they could move forward with development and that we would be able to get this? Let me know in the comment section down below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that junk, and I will see you guys in the next one.